I am Mary Saputo, the Community Outreach Coordinator here at Oasis, and I am so excited to say today we have Geoff Morrison with us, who's going to talk about his upcoming class on May 12th about the Third American Revolution. Doesn't that sound intriguing? So this is an upcoming two-part class, as I said, about the Third American Revolution. So can you just share a bit about your background and what in the world inspired you to lead this series in Oasis?
Well, thank you. First of all, I was trained at St. Louis University as a historian. And so I automatically do research. I'm automatically looking for connections and things and so forth. I was a research historian. But my vocation in life has been as a teacher. I've spent my career, I've taught for 50 years at Clayton High School and then at St. Louis University. I taught history and I worked as a school administrator during those years. Part of my inspiration for this particular class is that, first of all, I lived through it. I graduated from college in 1963 and began teaching. And so I watched the changes that were occurring in front of me and all around me. I was part of it myself. I was one of the people waiting to be drafted for Vietnam, and some guys went and other guys didn't. I didn't because I was married, it turned out. So much of it I lived through. Another part of this is that I was very much taken by the civil rights movement in the 1960s. And I wanted to dedicate my career to that. And so some years into the career, at the time of the Liddell case here in St. Louis, I became an inter-district volunteer. I spent a year working in St. Louis public schools as part of the desegregation plan. Worked with Black students as a senior level administrator. I was the principal of a part-time magnet program which brought Black kids to Clayton to prepare them for college. And then I went back to the classroom and I worked in the classroom with kids. And so that's a running theme through my career. In 1986, I was asked to give a speech to the Clayton Kiwanis Club. So I put together the ideas of the Third Revolution. And I was supposed to speak for an hour, and those guys had me there for 2 hours wanting to ask me questions and tell me about their stories and all the things. And since that time, it has evolved over the years, and I've revised it and brought it up to date. It's extremely relevant to people's lives today because a series of climactic events occurred compressed in that 10-year period between 1963 and 1974, 11-year period, that have influenced America all the way down to the present. And so that's the basis of this.
What are some of the pivotal events or shifts during this period that most significantly shaped America as we know it today? And I'm a 1955 born baby, so I know exactly what you're talking about. What are some of the events?
Technology. It was during this period that the computer chip was developed. We went from a computer chip to developing a computer. The computers had been developed during World War II, but by putting these chips in, they had so much more memory and could do so much more. By the time we sent a man to the moon, they were using an IBM computer that didn't have as much power as this phone. But
one of these big things that took up a whole room, right?
This one was smaller, but it was this big.
Okay.
But they had gotten them down that size. Sure. But nonetheless, the technology has dramatically changed us from being a production-based society to being an information-based society. And we can see the impact of that in today's news. When the debates over the tariffs and so forth. So many of our manufactured goods are from overseas. And so everything from our shoes to our clothing, our pots and pans, all of that stuff is from someplace else because we have outsourced our manufacturing, and now we're more based on processing information. And that has changed us dramatically. That has changed the whole way that we live. Another big change has come in the area of civil rights, social changes, enormous social changes that began in the 1960s. Certainly the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, the Education Act, all of these things related to civil rights. But in addition, it's at this time when you see the women's movement reaching its perhaps its third period of activity and of great influence, creating Betty Friedan, creating the National Organization of Women, and Ms. Magazine, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
The development of the birth control pill.
Some of the historical figures from that time would be, for instance,
if you go from John Kennedy,
sure,
who inspires an entire generation, and it's Kennedy who picks up on the test ban treaty. It's Kennedy who picks up on the environment. Mrs. Kennedy, they were at Hyannisport for a weekend, and Jackie Kennedy was reading an article by Rachel Carson. I think it was in the New Yorker magazine. And during the course of the weekend, she gave the magazine to her husband and said, "I think you ought to read this." So he read it. And on Monday morning, he called Rachel Carson. That's the beginning of the Environmental Protection Agency, which becomes law actually under Richard Nixon. But they set up a government commission to study what she said. They looked at the science and they came up with real life things. Enormous changes in medicine.
Yeah.
The growth of antibiotics, the growth of vaccines. When I was a little kid in the 50s, when I look at in my baby book that my mother had, all of us kids had chicken pox, measles.
Sure.
It was just part of growing up.
Yeah.
And by the time our kids were being born, they were being vaccinated. And the changes have continued and continued and continued. Of course, you could take a whole series of political figures. And this was also a period in the 60s of political chaos. And it was a turning point in that it was kind of the culmination of the New Deal from Franklin Roosevelt, the New Frontier, the Lyndon Johnson's The Great Society. And all of these things bring the liberal consensus to a head. The government involved more and more and more in people's lives, creating all kinds of agencies and so forth to impact society. But it's also a period in which, as a result of the Vietnam War, Americans began to lose faith in the government. When the Pentagon Papers were published, for example, it turned out that all the presidents going back to the revered Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower had lied about Vietnam. And it broke, and the Vietnam and Watergate broke the, what Abe Lincoln called the mystic chord.
Right.
And since that time, you've had more of an angry, almost an angry relationship between, the media and public figures. So, and you had pivotal, giant voices in this period. I was a freshman in college when John Kennedy was inaugurated. And when he gave his inaugural address, we had tingles going up and down our spines. He blew us away, We will pay any price. We will, good Lord, we were all ready to go out and sign up.
And so much of that is still, you still hear bits and pieces of that speech today.
That's right. Same thing with Martin Luther King.
Right.
He was powerful. He moved. And King was different from other leaders in that he could go to the pulpit and be a Baptist preacher. He could go before Congress and give a speech. He could speak to 100,000 people in Washington, D.C. on the march. He could go on Johnny Carson, The Tonight Show,
There you go.
and talk to Carson.
Uh-huh.
So he was, a pivotal guy.
Yeah.
Bobby Kennedy was like that.
Yes, yes.
And so you had these huge personages in that period.
Mm-hmm.
Supreme Court, enormous changes.
Goodness, this is so fascinating. Now I know why it's called the Third American Revolution. So why do you think a topic like this is so important in a class of Oasis at this time?
Because what it does is to help us of a certain age. I'm 83, and I am probably at the upper end of the Oasis population. But it's the story of our lives. Changes in values, the changes in goals, the changes in the way we make our living. Most of my kids and grandkids make their living with computer technology. Even my daughter, who does therapy, she's a social worker, does therapy with teenage kids. The student leaves the room and she's immediately on the computer writing a report of what just happened.
Yes.
It has to be filed.
Mm-hmm.
We've had enormous changes in the way that we live. And I think that's the value of this. It helps us to kind of focus and get some sort of, you could say, oh, that's what caused that.
Sure. I am so excited to hear this. I'm going to be there. I encourage everybody to sign up for this. It will be May 12th, right?
And then a week later, another 2-hour session.
Another 2-hour session. I absolutely can believe this is 2 hours each session. So again, at the beautiful Five Oaks on Morrison, May 12th, be there, be square, 10 a.m. I want to see you there. And again, thanks for watching.